There are a lot of things that unite us that revolve around solving the problems facing this country. That's what I'm going to bring to the leadership table.
Still be at the leadership table. That's Steve Scalise, the new House Majority Whip. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard; Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press; and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, panel. Steve, I want to start with you. You know, these comments made a long time ago, we should point out, in 2002. But initially, Steve Scalise said, I didn't really realize this group was a white supremacist group when he was invited by an advisor to David Duke. With anyone in politics, Democrat, Republican, Independent, if you don't know who David Duke is or what he stands for, that seems pretty remarkable. What's your take on this?
No, I agree with you, and I think that's one of the reasons why, despite the wishes of Republican leadership in Congress that this would just go away, I think that's one of the reasons that this sticks around. I mean, yesterday, Scalise gave an interview to the New Orleans Times-Picayune in which he basically said, as you suggest, look, I didn't really know what was going on. We didn't have Google back then. I was short-staffed. It wasn't clear to me what was happening. We've seen a change in the explanations that we're getting from him today. The change today is this was a mistake, and you saw in John Boehner's statement, he called it an error in judgment. Well, if you didn't know who you were addressing, that's bad advance work. That's not bad judgment. And there's a difference there, and I think the fact that the story has shifted the way that it has today means that Republicans are going to have to continue to answer questions about this, even if there's a pretty clear media double standard here. I mean, you know, President Obama was listening to Reverend Wright for years. He spoke at an event for Rashid Khalidi. I mean, was involved with some pretty unsavory characters, and those questions, a lot of people thought those questions were sort of off limits or shouldn't be discussed.
Okay, a lot to chew on there. Let me get, before I covered the Senate, before I covered the White House, I covered the Senate for a long time, and someone who was known as the conscience of the Senate was Democratic Senator Robert Byrd. I interviewed him many times. Very amiable fellow, but had been a grand wizard in the Ku Klux Klan a long time ago, long before he was in the Senate. Not just Democrats, but Republicans said, you know, they've largely moved on. What say you about that?
And the reason is that in the time in between, Byrd had acted decently. He reached out. He obviously had changed his views. I think the key question here is not just that this happened 12 years ago, but as far as I can tell, there is not a shred of evidence that there is anything in the intervening 12 years which would indicate any evidence of racism, hostility, or ill will, or anything of this nature, which means it would be a single event 12 years ago. Given the absence of anything of that sort in the 12 years, I think it's a pretty drastic thing to demand that he step down. I think Steve is right that there is a terrible double standard. Barack Obama didn't wander into Jeremiah Wright's church on one time 12 years ago. He sat in it for 22 years as the man who was a racist, raved against America, and talked about 9/11 being chickens coming home.
So if there's guilt by association, it's going to be difficulties for both parties.
There should be, and I think these aren't even comparable. I do think as a political issue, Scalise might have just stepped aside. But given that he hasn't, the Republicans are stuck with this, which is unfortunate. They're going to get hit over this a few times, but I can't see how they change their minds now.
You mentioned the president. Let me quick.